Welcome back. One of the first projects, in fact, the first project I ever did with a slab, but one of the first projects I did in the new house was building an office for my wife, and I did a custom walnut countertop. There was a couple of knots that I had chosen to fill with epoxy, just a simple black epoxy to sort of blend them in with the dark color of the walnut, and probably didn't seal them up very well before I filled them. Probably made a few mistakes filling them. Nevertheless, 2+ years down the road, the epoxy's turned white. And if I'm being honest, I have no idea why that happened. I'm assuming because it's bubbling on the inside. But it's white, and it doesn't look very good. And so I'm going to fix it. So you can see here, masking off the area around one of the two locations. There are two spots that these sort of knot cracks exist. And I'm going to fix both of them. They both turn white. So masking it off so that I can come through and basically cut away the existing epoxy. You can see the second one there. Using a 0.7 millimeter bit with my Dremel tool. And then I've got a really nice attachment here. It's actually from Stumac, which is a guitar company. They do tools for making guitars, but really great for a lot of these types of activities. If you want really good precision, it's a really nice tool to work with. With the depth set, I can set the tool down onto my tape surface so that I'm not going to scratch up the area around the crack. I'm only going to affect the crack itself and carve away the epoxy. And let me tell you, there is a lot of work here because to keep the crack looking natural, you really don't want to make unusual or unnatural surfaces as you cut away. So very carefully trying to follow the profile of the crack, trying to match it as well as I possibly can so that the final product looks relatively natural. With the way that the shavings are created, you can see here, every couple of seconds as I make a pass, I've got to come through with a vacuum hose and suck away those shavings and the dust that's created so that I can really clearly see the edges of the crack, and that way I can follow it as closely as possible. You can tell here that I'm cutting through the epoxy based on the fact that the majority of the shavings being created are white. That's the epoxy being cut away. Even though it's been dyed black, it still is white. The areas that I get close to the wood or get into the wood, you'll see a bit of brown shaving come up. And that's how I sort of know, okay, I've gotten to the edge. Don't go any further. Definitely got to stop there. Beyond what I can just see. Obviously, what I can see is critical, but what I can't see is critical as well. Once I've got the majority of the material hogged out with the Dremel tool, I come back with a marking knife to really get in there and do some fine detail work. So using this to just sort of scrape away along the edges any of the epoxy that's remaining, remove that out, and then also especially sort of the tips of the crack, if you want to think of it that way. Just trying to get a more fine point on it so it's not just the 0.7 millimeter rounded edge that I would have gotten with the tool. I get the tool as far as I can, and then use the knife to get that last little bit. And this is a long and painstaking process. Probably all the cutting just on one crack took me half an hour, maybe an hour, and then I got to come back and with the marking knife and a couple of chisels and a couple of other fine point tools, maybe another half hour there, and then also sanding away the edges as well, as you saw there, just to smooth things out. A couple of rough spots that I didn't do a great job with the cutting tool, leaving a nice edge. The sandpaper will just clean that up and just smooth it out. Again, trying to make it look as natural as possible so that when you look at the final product, it looks like it was the original crack. You can see as I move along here through some of the various cuts just how fine the details are. Um, Once you've sort of gotten through that original cut and hogged out the bulk material, trimming away the edges with the Dremel tool wasn't so bad because you're not creating quite as much of the shavings like this little bit here. You can see real easy through this section where you're just creating some sawdust, but then once you get into the bulk material and you're setting up that thicker shaving, much harder to see what's going on. And so not so bad for the touch-up, but the bulk material had to stop again every couple of seconds to suck that shavings away and get a better view. Not that you can necessarily tell, but I am here onto the second of the two cracks, working that down, trying to get it looking natural, trying to get it looking thin and clean. I want to make sure I get all the white material away so that what you see in the end is eventually going to be just black again. And then with that, I'm actually not going to fill with epoxy. I just took a very thin layer, and I'm going to refill this with a CA glue. So just a black CA glue using a fine point tip here. Eventually I'll switch and take that tip off and save it until the end, but the fine point tip worked really nice for the edges of the crack. Not so great for filling in the main sections where I was really trying to add quite a bit of material in there, where you're just filling in the gap. It will take a couple of layers to do this, so I probably put in, I think, 3 layers. So the first one is just sort of filling the base in. Second one is getting the bulk of the material done, and then the last is just to touch up a few spots. The benefit of using a CA glue with the hardener, 30 seconds, a minute, you're able to start sanding and then get into round number 2 of filling. Quick sand, got to make sure that you've got a roughed up surface so that the next layer can adhere nicely, and then go ahead and fill in number 2. You can see here, using a toothpick, I want to make sure I don't have any bubbles left behind. As I flatten sand this at the end, I don't want any bubbles to appear, but also just helping to make sure that there's good adherence to the wood surfaces. Pushing it up against the edge will help to make sure that happens. So you saw there, that was the second fill on crack number 2. This is going back to crack number 1. I've been sort of going back and forth, do both tasks on both, or all the tasks on both cracks, and because of that I sort of do 1 then 2, 2 then 1, 1 then 2, 2 then 1, sort of back and forth as I work through it. So filling up crack number 1 here with the second layer, again just trying to get the bulk material filled in. So this is just laying down a good thick bead, making sure I get all the bubbles out, making sure I get that good adherence to the edges of the wood so that I've got a good finish in the end with the toothpick. And then I'll come back with the spray after and make sure that that sets up nicely. One thing to note, when you're doing CA glue work, you never know what's going to happen. Try to keep those safety glasses on. I've never had CA glue in my eye, don't really want to find out how that's going to feel like. I've heard some stories, not something that I want to find out for myself. Coming back now, third layer, you can see I've got the fine point tip on. This is really getting those last little bits into the corners of the crack and finishing things off. So I want that fine applicator tip to make sure that I've got the best application in exactly the right spots as I can get it. So just filling in very carefully here to finish things off. Accelerator, and that one's done. With both cracks filled, I can peel that tape away, and time now to sand down. I will sand the entire area around the crack as well, just to make sure that I get a nice smooth finish all around. I'm starting at 220 grit, and then I'll finish off with 320. So really not a big deal. Really not taking much material off, so there's no worry here about getting into, uneven surfaces or anything like that. I can really just focus on getting the whole surface smooth and flat where the CA glue's been applied, and I'll be all set here. With the 220 grit done, move up to the 320. You noticed that I wrote 320 on there. That's really not for you guys. That's more for me. I'm not using a brand new sanding disc here. I'm using one that was lightly used, and I find the text tends to wear off when removing the Velcro sort of surface from the sander, and so I'll often come back with a black marker and just write their grit on. That way I can keep track of what grits they are. You can tell by feel as well, but I've got a number of sanding discs laying around that are lightly used, and so to make sure that I sort of keep on top of that. If the text is worn away, then I'll write it in. With the first crack, really the second crack, but the first crack done, come back and sand the second crack. Again, making sure I get a good flat surface all around, getting the CA glue flattened down to the surface of the countertop, and then the whole area nice and smooth. Same as the previous, start with the 220, get the bulk of the material moved away, and then switch over to the 320 and use that to finish things off, get the whole surface really smoothed up and really nice and clean. Want to get all that dust away, so with all the sanding done, bring in a little bit of rubbing alcohol and just wipe that whole surface down. That'll help to clean away any last little bit of debris. I've already vacuumed off the surface, but this will just get the rest of it. And then we can get it to finish. The way that I finished this the first time was a couple of coats of extra thin and then a couple of coats of the regular Pollux. And so I'm going to do the exact same thing. I want to keep this as consistent as possible. With the extra thin, I'll just focus on the area where I had worked, and so working that into the areas around the cracks, as you can see here. And after I've applied the extra thin, wait 20 minutes, come back, wipe it away. Pretty standard procedure. Both areas of the cracks, do them with 2 coats. I'm going to show you one here. You've seen that process many times here, so no need to spend too much time there. 2 coats, and then when that's all set up a week later, we've got time to come back and start on to the regular Pollux. Jumping ahead, after I've got the first coat of Pollux on, put a maroon buffing pad on the bottom of my oscillating sander here, and come back, and I'm going to do the whole surface this way, sand the whole thing down. This really isn't going to add any scratches into the surface. It's just going to take off a bit of that top layer and really help me to get a nice uniform surface for applying the finish to the whole top of the counter. So I could very clearly see as I was working through where the areas that I had applied the new Osmo versus the old Osmo were, and I knew that would happen, right? So just coming through, I'll finish or refinish the whole surface with 1 coat at the end, just to make sure I get a nice consistent finish. You can see there, wiped away all the excess dust with some rubbing alcohol again, and now I can come in and apply the Osmo Pollux to the entire surface. So dribble it on. I'll start by rubbing it in here by hand to the entire surface. And then we'll come back with the white buffing pad, so not maroon this time, we go to the white this time, and use that to really work the finish into the surface. I hadn't used the white buffing pad nor the red buffing pad for that matter when I first finished this top, and it looked nice for sure, but I'll tell you without question, it looks way better using that process. That's the first time I've used the maroon pad to scuff things up before that last coat, and I was really happy with the way that this turned out. It really brought another level of sheen, another level of clarity to the finish, and Not that I wanted a gloss finish, because that's not what I was going for, but a little more like a semi-gloss than a flat I thought would be nice. And once the whole surface had been buffed in, come back almost nearly straight away. By the time I got from one end to the other and really buffed the whole surface in, it wasn't a whole lot of time before I needed to start rubbing away the excess. So coming back with the blue towels nearly as quickly as possible and really wiping away that excess, you can really see the sheen coming through there. And with that, we're done. Surface completed, white gone, black back, and everything's back in order. Something a little different for you guys. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of different content here. Appreciate you watching. We'll see you next time.